In this video, we're going to work with the home page or the protected page, and we will work with the load user profile button. When user clicks on this button, we want to send the HTTP request to the server and load user profile, and that HTTP request will need to be authenticated. We will need to provide user ID and access token for the server side to be able to return and load user profile information from the database. Okay, so let's go to the home page, and the home page view controller is right here, and I will hide the left side and hide the right side to have more space. Okay, so when user taps on the load member profile button, this function is going to be called. Load member profile button will be called, and we're simply printing out at this moment load member profile button tab. So I will remove this comment, and I have actually taken entire code for this function, load member profile button, into a separate function which I called load member profile, and I will define it a little bit below right here. And I will close it, and all the code that reads information and sends information will go inside of this function. Okay, so the very first step for us will be to read the access token and read user ID from the keychain. And we already know how to do it, so I will copy this couple of lines of code right here. So we are referencing keychain wrapper, and we are reading access token from it and storing it under access token. It's a string value. And same we do for user ID. We reference keychain wrapper, read user ID, and store it under user ID. So now we need to compose HTTP request so that we can send it to our server side to a web service entry point and include these details into our HTTP request. Okay, so we're starting by creating a URL object, and that URL, this is going to be HTTP GET request, and that URL will contain user ID. And note the way it is composed, because I'm using RESTful web services, and this is going to be a request to get details of a particular user, a user that has user ID, which we identified under. And if you want to learn how that RESTful web service is developed, I have these details under my apps developer blog. This is where I mostly publish about RESTful web services at this very moment. And there is a blog post that is called Token-Based Authentication Example. So that blog post covers everything you need to know. It covers how to create web service to save new user profile details in database, and then how to create a RESTful web service to perform user authentication. And this particular example is how to use that access token to retrieve
user details from the database. So this is the exactly same request that I'm sending from my Swift app. This is I'm sending it to the localhost API users, and this is the public user ID, exactly same way that I'm using in my Swift app. And then I'm going to also include authorization bearer, the access token that I'm going to use. And this access token is not a complete version, is only partial version. The rest of it I'm explaining how to retrieve the other half and how to compose them together to come up with the actual value of the access token. And that value is encrypted. So this web service, this blog post is explaining you how to build that RESTful web service, which will accept access token and user ID, which will perform user authentication, which will read user profile from the database, and will return that user profile details back to a mobile application. And there are some video courses on how to build RESTful web service, and I have also attached a few books on this subject.
Okay, so RESTful Web Service source code is ready for you here under my blog post, apps developer blog. It's called token-based authentication. And since this video is not about RESTful Web Services, but about how to send information to the RESTful Web Service entry point, you might have your RESTful Web Services done with PHP or active server pages, other technologies. So this is the way to send HTTP request and to receive a response. So now we are going to let the HTTP request, to configure HTTP request to make it HTTP GET. This is how we tell that HTTP method is going to be HTTP GET rather than HTTP POST. And then we add a header value. This is going to be authorization bearer. And our RESTful web service will look for this header value, and it will read the access token from this header value. So we are storing access token that we have on our keychain under this header value. Okay, and now is the time to send HTTP request, and we are doing it using the task. And task will be resumable, so I have to open it and I have to close it here and make it resumable. Okay, so now when this HTTP task, when this task completes, like it takes request as a parameter, and then once it completes, this block of code will be executed within this curly brackets. And these objects like data, response, and error will be populated with information. So data will contain the response from the server, and if error takes place, it will be stored under the error object. Okay, so let's continue, and let's first of all check if there is an error. So once HTTP request completes, we need to check if there is an error. We will display a message, and we already know how to display dialog windows to a user. We are using the function display message. I will copy this function into this file once again, but you can actually already take it, because we are repeating this function all over again. You can take it into a separate class so that you don't have to copy and paste it into every single Swift file. Okay, so we have display function, display message, and that function will display alert controller with the message that it receives as an argument. Okay, so if error takes place, we will display an error message, but if everything is okay, we will need to convert response that was sent to us from the server side into NSDictionary. And we will do that with the use of JSONSerialization. So I'm going to paste it right here. So we use do, try, and now we need to catch. And again, if error takes place, we will display an error message. But if everything is okay, we are going to be working with the JSON object here, which is going to be already NSDictionary, because we are converting it to NSDictionary. Okay, so I think I'm missing here a curly bracket. Okay, so now let's unwrap the JSON, and if it's not empty, then we will use the values. So I will check if this JSON object is not empty, so I'll use if let, and then if it contains value, it will be stored under parse JSON. And then because I'm going to update user interface from within the asynchronous task background thread, I will need to dispatch it on the main queue. So I'm going to read first name and last name, which I know my JSON
payload will contain when server-side responds back with member profile. I know that it will contain first name and last name because I was the one to prepare this web service, and I know that I'm returning this information back to a mobile application. And now when I have this, and I'm simply checking if they're not empty, if there is a value, then I need to refer to the text field, to the label that I have. And the label is on the main user interface that we have created. It should be the outlet. Here we go. A user full name label is the outlet. So I will use it here. I will refer to that label text, and then I will set, and I will concatenate first name together with the last name separated by the space, and the value will be stored under full name. You can add more labels, and you can add more details into your user interface that comes from your user profile. It's just an example how to read information received from a server side and how to update your user interface from within the task, data task that we are sending to a server side. Okay, so now we have received, we have updated our user interface, but there is a chance that this information is empty. Again, there is a chance that JSON is empty and it doesn't contain these details. So if it takes place, then again we will simply put an else here and display an error message. Well, when it comes, this is a very simple example. When it comes to error handling, you can use special keys. You can store all of these strings in their property value and property files, and then make your server side return an error or the message key, which you can use to retrieve the actual message from the property file. And that message can be either in English or French. That property file can be internationalized. And I also have a blog post for you here. It's called Exception Handling in a RESTful Web Service. So this blog post shows you how to handle an error message in your RESTful web service, and then how to prepare a response, which will be a JSON payload message. And that response will contain an error message key, which you can use in your Swift application to retrieve the friendly message from a property file stored in your Swift mobile application. And an error message for a developer, so the developer knows why this error took place. And again, there's a source code that you can look up, and the entire example is in this blog post. Okay, so and I think this is it. So we are reading information, and if error takes place, we display this information. But if everything is okay, we are updating user interface. We have only one single label in our user interface, and we are updating it with the first name and last name. I will set a breakpoint here so that I can look up what's inside of my parse JSON, and I will set breakpoint here so that I see my first name. I'll set a breakpoint here, and here I'm going to run this application, and I want to debug every single step of it, and I will set a breakpoint here so that I see the access token and user ID that comes from the keychain wrapper. Okay, and now we are ready to run this example and see how it works. Okay, my application is up and running. I will sign in with the username and password that I have. Oops, I think it should be Y. Once again, this is a non-existent email address. Please do not try to email me at this email address. I think I have created Sergey at kargapolov.com, and the password was 123. I click on sign in. Alright, I need to start up server. Let me pause this video and I will start up Apache Tomcat. Okay, my Apache Tomcat is now running. I will click on sign in again. And you see that activity indicator spinning, showing that something is going on. Okay, and I'm signed in. Now I will click on a load user profile button. And my load member profile function is called. So I can play a couple of lines, and I see that access token and user ID is here. Very well, it's working. So I'll just play it. And I jumped straight away to the if let statement that tells me that air object is empty. I see that that's nil, so there is nothing to display. JSON is here and it contains 4 values: first name, last name, user ID, and username. And this one is also successful. Now this JSON is unwrapped into parse JSON, and it also contains 4 values. And now we're going to update the user interface. I come in and then I read first name and last name from my already NSDictionary. So this one will be NSDictionary. And the values are here, and I'll simply play it because everything is okay. So here's the value. Username and password, first name and last name have been loaded to the user interface. Now I'll disable debugging and I can sign out and stop this application, run this application again. It will take me to the sign in page. Here we go. I can sign in once again at kargapolov.com. 123, sign in. You see the full name is empty, and I click on load member profile and it loads in. Okay, so this is it. It's working, and I hope this video was useful for you.